In this episode of Witty CFB, we're going to be discussing the Arkansas Razorbacks, who are coming off a really strong victory this week against Mississippi State. And for those who haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I did a preview of Arkansas before the season. That's definitely worth checking out. But looking at this Arkansas team, they're coming off 5-3, and their only losses was a really back and forth game versus Texas A&M, the double overtime game versus Oklahoma State, and obviously the week before where they got whooped by LSU. Now, when you're looking at this Arkansas team, full picture, I mean, the storylines going into the year were pretty evident in terms of, Arkansas giving Sam Pittman another season, although, there was obviously some controversy in terms of, whether or not they should keep for another year. But, he went out and got Bobby Petrino, 5 days after the season, fired Dan Anos during the 2023 season last year after the offense was, really struggling. And, when you look at this team all together, I mean, obviously the, kryptonite of this Arkansas team and kind of the general storyline has always been, can they win those close games? And, so far, it's kind of been a mixed bag. I mean, definitely a little bit better than what we see in years past. I mean, I would certainly argue that they should have won the Oklahoma State game. And, for those who don't remember that game, it was needless to say, it was a comedy of errors in terms of, so many different turnovers. And, but that's part of watching college football too. And in week 0 or week 1 is you're going to get a lot of teams who, are kind of coming out a little bit undisciplined. You're still kind of figuring themselves out. And, now that we've been watching Arkansas this season, I think we're at the point now where we're really kind of starting to see, Bobby Petrino's influence and identity really kind of being in their game plan every week, and seeing the struggles and successes as well. Because, talked about it earlier in the season. I mean, Taylen Green is really fun to watch. I mean, he's a dual threat quarterback, freakish athleticism, can get the deep ball, has the right rhythm and, cadence when it comes to the short and intermediate throws. But I think his biggest kind of Achilles heel has in general been, kind of those on the run throws, like, finding that balance between, being able to throw on the run, but also being able to set your feet, making sure you're finding the right target, like those kind of examples where if he, can kind of clean up the footwork a little bit and, and work on the throwing motion, which it seems like he's been doing under Bobby Petrino. I mean, you think about all the successful quarterbacks he's worked with. I go back and think of, Ryan Mallett from early 2009, 2010. I think of Lamar Jackson from, 2016, 2017. Although I think a footnote of that sort of era under Lamar Jackson would obviously be, in his final season at Louisville, he got sacked 47 times. So it's kind of been that back and forth between, if they were not to keep Sam Pittman, would Bobby Petrino possibly step in and be the guy to take over? Because I think that's really kind of the debate that I think many Arkansas fans have been having too. But yet again, they're one win away from a bowl game. And I think going into the year, the general expectation was it's at a minimum, it needs to be bowl game or bust at this point, because the issue that Arkansas has is, yes, you have the, sort of coming of age, sort of redemption arc of Bobby Petrino. But at the same time, what you struggle with is, I think for the most part, the fans at Fayetteville have, embraced Petrino at this point. At this point, it was 11, I think it was 11 plus years ago, or 11, 12 years ago at this point. So I feel like it's just kind of water underneath the bridge now, because, people have seen his success at Western Kentucky, and Louisville. And, he also had a brief stint at Missouri State too, who's now going to be in FBS in the Conference USA starting next year. But I think moving forward, when you kind of ask yourself, because Bobby Petrino is one hell of an offensive coordinator too, and I think that's definitely kind of the influence that Pittman needs. Is, yes, we understand Pittman's a phenomenal recruiter. He's a players type coach. he's a guy that you can he's a guy that a team's going to rally around. But at the same time, it gets to the point where, how many times can we sit here and justify Pittman in Arkansas losing a big game over, over, quite frankly, turnovers? Because I think that's been the one big fundamental issue that we've seen with Arkansas, is particularly just the turnovers, especially in those critical moments. But if you look at the Mississippi State game this week, Taylen Green had just shy of 400 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and quite frankly, it was really just one of those games where they really just kind of needed a bounce back week after the struggles they had versus LSU. And even going back to the LSU game, if you want to sit there and talk about that, yes, they only had 38 rushing yards going into that, but Arkansas was in it up until the third quarter. And to me, what really shifted in that game was as soon as Taylen Green threw that interception in the third quarter, that's to me when it completely shifted to LSU, and they kind of just ran away with the game too. Nothing, of course, we're not sitting here taking away from LSU at all. It's more of just, Arkansas as a team as a whole right now. And when you think about them too, I also think about that incredible win versus Tennessee, which they deserved. And it's one of those things too where, if you watch the earlier games of the season, you would think a lot of their games would kind of be more or less kind of a shootout where you thought to yourself, can Taylen Green, make enough big explosive plays, and is he going to be utilized in the right way to the point where it's going to mask some of those deficiencies that I explained earlier. But looking at this team, sort of, full picture going into the rest of the year, in my opinion, I've been generally impressed with what I've seen, all things considered. I mean, you're just kind of you're just in a different spot right now because, like I said, like you see on the ticker, 20 and 28 going into his fifth year, and you have a really tough game. Luckily, you're home versus Ole Miss, which they're coming off a victory versus Oklahoma, but they've definitely shown some clear weaknesses too. I mean, Jackson Dart has been a little bit off these past couple weeks. You have you have a really strong defensive line there who can definitely make plays, but at the same time, it's one of those things where they're just kind of letting teams hang on a little bit further. And also you have to ask yourself too, to what extent does Lane Kiffin have one foot out the door already? Because obviously going into the year, one of the big things that Ole Miss fans were kind of clinging for was a national championship, and now that they're at 2 losses now, their backs are certainly against the wall. And to me, this would be a really good week for Arkansas to steal another victory. I mean, Ole Miss is ranked 19th right now, and I definitely would agree that they're one of the top 25 teams in the country. But as I look at this team, I would argue that even if right now Arkansas, just by beating Louisiana Tech, they make a bowl game, right? And I would argue that Sam Pittman has shown enough that he deserves another season. Because the problem that you have is, okay, let's say you go ahead and get rid of Petrino or get rid of Pittman at the end of the season, right? I think in many ways you have a lot of the same limitations that you do with Pittman as you would if you had Petrino. Both of them are in their early 60s, so you can only imagine, what their longevity is too. But at the same time, if I think you would have a lot of players transfer as well if Sam Pittman were to leave, because you have to imagine too, how much is Bobby Petrino really going to be able to, handle the offense now, and in the days of NIL and the transfer portal and all that. Because last time he was a head coach at Missouri State, that was kind of like the beginning origins of it, and it's a completely different animal going from FCS Missouri State to here. And I think that's an element of that sort of transfer, of that changing of the guard from Pittman to Petrino, that I think a lot of people are underestimating. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that Petrino can't recruit or can't get guys to come in, or can't replace the productivity that he has right now. But at the same time, if you're an Arkansas ID, if you're in a situation where you can have both of them, and you're almost certain that Bobby Petrino wouldn't leave for another head coaching job, to me, Pittman has shown enough resolve with this team and enough things going in the right direction to the point where I would argue he's done enough as of right now. Because at this point, if they can even beat Ole Miss or Texas, I mean, to me that would be the icing on the cake already. As they beat Tennessee a couple weeks ago, 19-14. They played Texas A&M, a really tough Texas A&M team who, went out and beat LSU. I'll have a Texas A&M video up in a couple of days too. But you know, I do see some legitimate promise of this team, and when I covered them at the beginning of the season, I knew that this would be a topic that I would eventually want to revisit too, because it's one of those things you see on the screen, and you're just like, you know for the 2 or 3 plays that they get right, they do 3 or 4 things wrong. So it's like it's one of those things you say to yourself, you're like, damn, I just want Arkansas to finally win a close game. And when you have all those close losses, I mean, you can even just think back to, yes, they had Bobby Petrino, then they had Chad Morris, and you know they've just been, they kind of, it's, again, Arkansas is a really tough job too. And I rattled off all those names, and yes, there's been some struggles and things like that too, but consistently under Sam Pittman, they've always had some really challenging schedules. And of course, I'm not sitting here saying that Sam Pittman deserves another year because he's playing a tough schedule. But at the same time, I'd like to point out, it's not like they're getting their ass whooped every week. I do think we're seeing some legitimate progression in terms of this Arkansas defense as well, who kind of struggled in the first couple games of the year. But I think what's coming alive in terms of Arkansas that I think is getting overlooked to some degree is, to me, Arkansas's rushing attack is getting a lot better. I mean, when you have an Arkansas team that for the most part has, in my opinion, not tapped into the running game enough. I mean, of course, historically, Petrino offenses have never been truly a kind of run happy team. But when you have dual threats like that, I think you have to ask yourself, how can you maximize that as much as possible while also assuring that Taylen Green stays healthy, and really you make sure that he's there in these next 4 games too, because you know because after that, I mean, Louisiana Tech's gonna be your 6, and Mizzou has kind of fallen apart these past couple weeks. So you can imagine too. Yes, they're on the road, but if you can knock that off too, that's already, you're already looking at kind of a 7-3 win. And even if you end the year with 7-5 with the schedule that they had, and they played Ole Miss and Texas really tough, I would struggle personally getting rid of Pittman. 'Cause, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head what his contract buyout would be, but you got to imagine that he's perhaps maybe towards the end of his contract. I think that would have been a good thing to look up before I did this. That's the one thing I should have thought of. But when you're looking at this team full picture, I mean, you have Taylen Green. He's a dual threat. He's athletic. Great arm strength, good accuracy down the field, and they've bounced back. They've done what they needed to do. They've you know they've clearly shown that they can run the ball at least to some degree. When you only run the ball 38 yards against LSU, and you come back and you do that versus Missouri versus Mississippi State, and then especially too, you think of this Ole Miss defense too, and you think of that back at that Kentucky game where Kentucky had some legitimate success running the ball. So are there some different windows for Arkansas to open up this explosive offense just a little bit more, and maybe get Ole Miss being really aggressive, and because in many ways this game is going to be just as much pressure on them too. But again, Fayetteville, very tough place to play, always a great atmosphere, and that's certainly a game that I'm going to have my eyes on going into this Saturday. But let me know in the